In January 1984, a 57-year-old man from Grand Isle, Louisiana, vanished without a trace. In 1986, human remains were discovered in a rural water well in Manny, Louisiana. Both cases remained cold for decades. In April 1986, the Sabine Parish Sheriff's Office opened a crime investigation following the discovery of human remains. The skeletal remains were recovered from a water well on farmland just outside the town of Manny, Louisiana. Although the remains were collected and logged, his identity remained unknown for decades. He was known as the man in the well. It was not until 2021, 35 years later, that advancements in forensic science allowed authorities to positively identify them as belonging to Lester J. Rome. Lester, born on April 20, 1926, was a man from Grand Isle, Louisiana. By the age of 57, he had established himself as the owner of a lounge on the island called Rome's Lounge. On January 9, 1984, Lester was last seen, and when days passed without any word from him, his family grew concerned. They reported him missing to the Grand Isle Police Department later that same month. The case was soon handed over to the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office for further investigation. As the detectives from the Sheriff's Office began their inquiry, attention quickly turned to Patricia Tito, a teenager who had been living in Lester's home at the time of his disappearance. Patricia was not only residing with him, but was also known to be his live-in girlfriend. In the aftermath of his disappearance, she assumed control of many aspects of his life. She continued operating the lounge in his absence, stayed in his house, and used his car. Her occupation of Lester's property and business raised suspicion, especially when his brother arrived on the island and promptly evicted her from the premises. Patricia's behavior and the stories she shared further deepened investigators' concerns. According to multiple reports, she told residents that she had driven Lester to the airport for a trip and that she was the last person to see him. However, she gave a different version of events to another woman, claiming that Lester had transferred ownership of the lounge to her and left the state voluntarily. These conflicting narratives raised significant red flags for the authorities and made her a key figure in the case. Despite being considered a suspect by the sheriff's office, Patricia was never formally charged. The investigation stalled due to the absence of crucial evidence, most notably Lester's body. Without physical proof of foul play or a crime scene, the detectives were unable to move forward. Every lead pointed back to Patricia, yet the lack of tangible evidence left the authorities at a standstill, and the case went cold. In 2021, the renewed investigation quickly shifted its focus back to Patricia Tito. She was already behind bars, serving a 40-year prison sentence. She had pleaded guilty to manslaughter in 2007 after admitting to the fatal shooting of a Shreveport woman on August 31, 2003. The woman is Judy Wynn. Tito said she stood outside Judy's home and shot her as she was washing dishes. With Lester's remains finally identified, the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office joined the Sabine Parish authorities in re-examining the details of his case. During interviews with a Sabine Parish detective, Tito admitted that she had knowledge that Lester's life was ended, though she initially claimed she had only witnessed the event. According to her account, another man, Devin Avard Sibley, was responsible for ending Lester's life, allegedly over a substance-related debt. An arrest warrant was issued for him. The well in which Lester's remains were found was on a property formerly owned by Sibley's family. She further stated that the fatal incident occurred in Jefferson Parish, which aligned with her presence in Grand Isle at the time of his disappearance. Her statement prompted Jefferson Parish investigators to pursue the case with renewed determination. In 2022, Tito was transferred back to Jefferson Parish for further questioning. As the investigation progressed, she changed her story again, offering a new narrative. This time, she alleged that she and Lester had been entering into a business arrangement, but their partnership soured when he made unwanted advances toward her. Tito claimed that the business deal collapsed, and, shortly after, Lester lost his life. The investigators, armed with new testimony and the long-awaited confirmation of Lester's identity, presented the case to a grand jury. In December 2023, a Jefferson Parish grand jury indicted Patricia Tito to the second degree. On November 13, 2024, Tito was formally sentenced to life in prison for her role. In December 1978, investigators uncovered a chilling secret beneath the floorboards of John Wayne Gacy's home in Norwood Park, Illinois. Hidden in a cramped crawl space lay the remains of a man whose identity remained a mystery for decades. On December 26, 1978, investigators made a grim discovery when they located a body concealed within the crawl space of John Wayne Gacy's home in Norwood Park. Gacy, a notorious serial offender, had used this hidden area to bury many of his victims. He passed away on May 10, 1994 in Stateville Correctional Center. Despite thorough forensic examinations, the precise cause of the man's demise was never determined, leaving many questions about his final moments unanswered. Unable to identify the body at the time, he remained a John Doe and was eventually laid to rest on June 12, 1981, at Oak Ridge Glen Oak Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. Among the victims recovered from Gacy's residence, several remained unidentified for decades, including those referred to as Body 10, Body 13, Body 21, Body 26, and Body 28. In 2021, more than 4 decades later, in a collaborative effort to solve these lingering mysteries, the Cook County Sheriff's Office partnered with the DNA Doe Project. The project focused on Body 5, extracting a DNA profile and comparing it to public databases to find potential family matches. This led investigators to the man's surviving relatives, including his mother and half-brother, who provided their own DNA samples for comparison. After extensive testing, on October 25, 2021, the DNA results conclusively confirmed that the remains belonged to Francis Wayne Alexander, finally putting a name to the decades-old mystery. Francis was born on March 11, 1955 in Manchester, North Carolina. Later in life, he relocated to New York, where he briefly married. However, the marriage ended in divorce after just 3 months in 1975. Shortly afterward, in February of that same year, Francis moved to Chicago. There, he worked in a variety of bars and clubs, supporting himself while maintaining regular contact with his family despite the distance. His half-sister fondly recalled receiving a postcard from him shortly before Christmas in 1975. In the message, Francis expressed his love and promised to visit soon. Trusting his words, she expected him to keep that promise, but Francis never arrived. Over time, as communication became increasingly infrequent, his family grew worried about his well-being. Concerned for his safety, his family reached out to the police in California, believing Francis might be working there. Unfortunately, due to a misunderstanding between the family and law enforcement, no missing person report was ever officially filed. Records from the police show that he was still in Chicago on January 5, 1976, when he received a traffic ticket. This is the last known official record confirming his whereabouts. Francis's demise was estimated to have occurred between January 1976 and March 1977, but the cause remained unknown. Despite this breakthrough, the circumstances that brought Francis into contact with Gacy remain unclear. There is no evidence indicating that Francis worked in construction or had any professional ties to Gacy, who was himself a contractor. The identification of Francis's remains brought some measure of closure to his family after decades of uncertainty. His family said in a statement, "It is hard, even 45 years later, to know the fate of our beloved Wayne. His life was taken at the hands of a violent and evil man. Our hearts are heavy. Our sympathies go out to other victims' families. Our only comfort is knowing this perpetrator no longer breathes the same air as we do. We can now lay to rest what happened and move forward by honoring Wayne." In April 1984, skeletal remains were discovered in Palmer, Alaska. The victim, a young woman, had been shot and stabbed. Her identity remained a mystery for decades. On April 25, 1984, skeletal remains were discovered near Horseshoe Lake. The remains were determined to be those of a woman who had suffered both a gunshot wound and a stab wound, suggesting a violent end. Due to the lack of identifying information, the woman was labeled Horseshoe Harriet, based on the location where her body had been found. For decades, Horseshoe Harriet remained a mystery, her name and life story buried with her remains. Almost 2 decades later, her remains were exhumed in 2003 in an attempt to extract a DNA sample from her bones. The goal was to match her profile with entries in the Federal Missing Person Database. Despite these efforts, no matches were found, and her identity remained unknown. A second exhumation took place in 2014. Again, DNA was collected and uploaded to the FBI's missing person database. However, just like the earlier attempt, this search yielded no results, and she continued to be known only by her nickname. Years passed with no progress, until a new approach was taken in August 2021. Her DNA profile was uploaded into a public genetic genealogy database, opening up the possibility of identifying her through relatives rather than direct matches. This technique, which had successfully helped solve other cold cases, brought renewed hope to a case that had long gone cold. With the help of this database, investigators began tracing genetic connections through multiple close matches. Genealogical research conducted by Parabon Nanolabs and the Alaska Bureau of Investigation led to a breakthrough. The findings pointed to a potential match, a woman named Robin Pelkey. Based on this possibility, ABI reached out to the Arkansas State Police for assistance. The agency then contacted a very close relative of Robin's and obtained a DNA sample from them, which was sent to the State of Alaska Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory in Anchorage for analysis. By September 2021, the results from the kinship DNA analysis confirmed what investigators had hoped. Horseshoe Harriet was indeed Robin Pelkey. Robin was born in 1963 in Denver, Colorado. As a teenager, she moved to Arkansas, but by 1981, she had returned to Alaska to live with her father and stepmother. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, she lived in Anchorage, a city she would remain in until her sudden disappearance. By the early 1980s, she had become unhoused and was living on the streets of Anchorage. However, by late 1982 or early 1983, she had vanished without a trace. The investigators later came to believe that Robin became one of the victims of Robert Hansen, a serial offender who owned a bakery in Anchorage and became infamously known as the Butcher Baker. Hansen was notorious for abducting women, transporting them to isolated areas, either by car or plane, and then hunting them down in the Alaskan wilderness. His methods were both calculated and brutal, turning the remote terrain into his personal hunting ground. In October 1983, Hansen was arrested. The following year, he pleaded guilty to ending the lives of 4 women whose remains had been found in Alaska between 1980 and 1983. During his confessions, Hansen admitted to taking the lives of 17 women. He cooperated with the investigators, revealing the burial sites of several of his victims, including the woman later identified as Robin. Despite this revelation, her true identity remained unknown for many years. Hansen passed away on August 21, 2014, while serving his 461 years imprisonment without parole. In April 2011, the Plano police in Texas began investigating a terrifying indecent assault after a woman reported being awoken by an intruder in her bedroom. A blood-stained pillowcase left behind became the key piece of evidence that sparked a complex investigation spanning over years and multiple cities. On April 2, 2011, the detectives in Plano began investigating an indecent assault case. The victim reported that she was awoken in her bedroom by a man who had placed his hand over her mouth to keep her silent. In an act of resistance, the woman bit the man's hand, causing him to bleed onto the pillowcase. During the assault, the man reached for a pillow, intensifying the victim's fear for her life. In an effort to de-escalate the situation, the woman spoke calmly to her attacker throughout the assault. According to the victim, the man told her he was around 40 years old and entered her home through an unlocked window. He also revealed that he knew her name. After the assault, the man instructed the woman to shower in the dark. The victim described her attacker as a black man with a beard who appeared educated and clean. He mentioned that he had been married, but did not have children. Notably, the attacker expressed remorse for his actions and promised that he would never repeat such behavior. Following the assault, the woman attempted to get the man to leave through the front door, but he instead exited through a back door leading to the backyard. When the police arrived, they collected the pillowcase stained with blood as evidence. From this, the investigators were able to obtain a DNA profile. A few days later, on April 6th, the victim received a phone call from her attacker, who apologized for what he had done. The police traced this call to a Chevron Food Mart at 1320 Gross Road in Mesquite and secured surveillance footage capturing a person using the phone before leaving the scene. Further investigation revealed connections to similar indecent assaults reported in Coppell and Corinth later that year, on September 15th and October 14th respectively. The police noted striking similarities in the attacker's behavior, including knowing the victim's name and making similar statements. DNA analysis confirmed that the male DNA collected from the Coppell victim matched the bloodstained DNA from the Plano pillowcase. Additionally, DNA from the Corinth case matched the profiles from the Coppell and Plano assaults. The authorities also linked this DNA to a suspect involved in a separate attack in Arlington in 2003, establishing a pattern across multiple incidents. The case eventually went cold until it was reopened more than a decade later. The detectives stated in the complaint that their investigation into Jeffrey Lemor Wheat involved genealogical research, online records, social media analysis, and numerous interviews. These efforts collectively led them to identify Wheat as the prime suspect in the series of indecent assaults. This comprehensive approach was crucial in connecting Wheat to the crimes that had remained unsolved for years. On November 12, 2020, the investigators interviewed Wheat's ex-wife, who confirmed he was the father of her child. When shown a 2011 surveillance video from outside the gas station, where the attacker had made a phone call, she immediately recognized Wheat. She cited specific details, including his distinctive walk, shoulder structure, height, and the fact that he wore glasses, all of which convinced her that the man in the footage was indeed Wheat. The authorities then collected a DNA sample from Wheat's child, which was analyzed by a forensic lab. The results indicated that the suspect's DNA profile from the crime scene could not exclude the child as a possible biological relative. This genetic link provided a critical connection between Wheat and the DNA evidence recovered from multiple assault cases, strengthening the case against him. Wheat was born in 1973 and had a troubled history marked by concerning behavior. It is known that he was discharged from the Navy due to inappropriate conduct toward women. Despite this, Wheat maintained a public image as a family man and a good neighbor. However, those who knew him were also aware of compulsions that led him to act in bizarre and troubling ways. Wheat was arrested on January 11, 2021, in cooperation with the Arkansas State Police. Following his arrest, he was transferred to the Collin County Detention Center and held on a $500,000 bond. The affidavit further revealed that Wheat's ex-wife believed that he worked for Brink's Security Customer Service in 2003, the same company used by the victim in the Arlington assault that year. By 2011, she thought he was employed by Fiserv, a financial services firm. The detectives noted that the 2011 victims were connected through an organization that utilized Flagship Merchant Services, a credit card company later acquired by Fiserv. The crimes involved 3 women in their 50s and 60s, all alumni of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, who were assaulted in their homes. Wheat pleaded guilty to 4 cases across Dallas, Collin, Tarrant, and Denton counties. In February 2024, he received life sentences in Collin County for the 2011 Plano assault and in Tarrant County for the 2003 Arlington case. He was sentenced to 30 years in Dallas County for the 2011 Coppell assault and 20 years in Denton County for the 2011 Corinth attack. The daughter of one of Wheat's victims talked about him stealing her mother's self-dignity, self-worth, and feeling of truly being loved. But she said today was victorious, knowing that he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. In the spring of 1971, a 15-year-old left his Boise, Idaho home and was never seen again. Nearly 5 decades later, a search would reignite a dormant investigation. On July 29, 1971, an unidentified deceased juvenile male was found floating in Sneddon Creek, located in the Englewood area of Coos County, Oregon. The condition and positioning of the body led the investigators to nickname the individual Frog Boy. Due to decomposition and the lack of identifying information, the officials were unable to determine the cause of demise. The discovery raised immediate concerns, but without a clear link to a missing person, the case remained unresolved. Nearly 5 decades later, in 2016, a woman's quest to find her father led to a groundbreaking forensic effort that exhumed Frog Boy's remains and unlocked a long-lost identity through DNA. Using a grant from the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office, the team submitted the DNA to the National Missing and Unidentified Person System database and collaborated with Parabon Nanolabs for further analysis. In May 2021, after another 5 years went by, Parabon provided a detailed DNA profile of the unidentified boy. Although the profile did not reveal a name, it produced key insights into ancestry, skin tone, eye and hair color, and facial morphology. This data helped narrow the search and was compared against records from cold cases, missing persons, and genealogical databases. Eventually, the DNA evidence led investigators to the Maxey family. The detectives from Coos County reached out and requested a DNA sample from the biological sister to confirm the match. Once her sample was submitted and analyzed, the authorities were able to confirm that the remains found in 1971 belonged to Winston Arthur Maxey III. Winston was born in 1956 and was a 15-year-old boy from Boise, Idaho. In the spring of 1971, Winston left his home with hopes of finding job opportunities in Oregon. Before departing, he informed his sister that he was heading to Coos Bay and planned to hitchhike his way to the Oregon coast. At the time, Winston was unaware that he had fathered a child in Idaho. The child was later placed for adoption, and Winston continued on his journey, not knowing the life he had left behind. After Winston left Idaho, his family never heard from him again. Days turned into weeks, and eventually into months, with no communication from the teenager. Despite efforts to locate him, there were no clear leads or sightings that could help track his movements after he left for Oregon. In 2016, Lori Merriam, Winston's daughter who was given up for adoption, began a determined search for her biological father, a man whose name was not listed on her birth certificate. Lori had spent her life with unanswered questions about her origins. Her search led her to her biological mother, who shared a painful piece of the past. At just 15 years old, the mother had been forced to give up her baby, and she revealed that the father was another 15-year-old, Winston Maxey. Lori said the following about meeting her biological mother. "When we first met, we hugged, and it was just like instant connection. That was a puzzle piece that was missing and just filled my heart. I cannot even describe the connection." Motivated by the need for answers, Lori created a Facebook page titled, "Where in the World is Winston Maxey?" hoping to connect with anyone who might have known him or had information about his whereabouts. She also filed a missing persons report to make his disappearance official in the national database. However, despite her efforts, she encountered an end. Nobody had seen or heard from Winston since the 1970s. Through her research, Lori learned that Winston had reportedly fallen in with the wrong crowd during his teenage years. He was known to have had a strained relationship with his family and had ultimately run away from home, vanishing without a trace. Thanks to the officials starting to investigating cold cases, Lori found her father. The Coos County officials worked with Winston's family in Idaho to issue a demise certificate and return his remains. For Lori Merriam, it was the end of a long search and the beginning of healing. Frog Boy was finally identified, and the missing persons case was solved. What happened to Winston and how he passed away is still under investigation. In August 1988, skeletal remains were discovered near a dumpster in Sheridan, Colorado. For over 3 decades, the victim was known only as John Doe. In August 1988, skeletal remains of a male were discovered near a dumpster in the 2800 block of West Oxford Avenue. Despite the location of the body, the investigators were unable to uncover information about his hometown or any details explaining why he was in Colorado. The victim was referred to only as John Doe, as authorities struggled to establish his identity. Initially, the investigators believed he might have been a Mexican national, based on limited evidence and assumptions at the time. Despite thorough and tireless efforts from law enforcement, the case remained unresolved for decades, with no suspects or clear leads emerging to explain the circumstances surrounding his demise. In 2020, after 3 decades has passed, the Sheridan Police Department requested the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to review the decades-old case once again. Advances in forensic science allowed the investigators to collect enough genetic material from evidence preserved since 1988 to utilize genetic genealogy technology. This new approach revealed that the victim was of Middle Eastern descent, a breakthrough that shifted the investigation in a new direction. By October 2021, the officials had identified the victim as 36-year-old Akram Bada'an using a combination of DNA evidence and government records. The DNA analysis traced Akram's family origins back to Israel, confirming his Middle Eastern heritage. Sheridan Police Detective Brian Penry emphasized the significance of this breakthrough during a press conference, stating, "The most important thing in this case, aside from giving the victim justice, is giving the victim his name back." CBI analyst Audrey Simpkins added that the team was able to extract sufficient DNA evidence to submit for genetic genealogy testing, which had not been possible before. Chris Wilcox, Senior Chief Deputy District Attorney for the 18th Judicial District, highlighted the dedication of the Cold Case Unit. They were formed in 2013 specifically to address unresolved investigations, assuring the community and victims' families that the search for those responsible for such violent crimes would continue without pause. The case of identifying John Doe is now solved, and the victim has his name back. But the investigation into who ended Akram's life remains active. The officials are urging the public to come forward with any information that might assist the case. Metro Denver Crime Stoppers has been contacted to collect tips, and a reward of $2,000 has been offered to encourage cooperation. Anyone with information is asked to contact Metro Denver Crime Stoppers at 720-913-7867. Tips can also be submitted online at Metro Denver Crime Stoppers website.